Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. This is Grace Morrison, age 25, arriving in Silver Creek, Wyoming territory in 1885 to testify in a murder trial. The accused is Clayton Mercer, a wealthy cattle rancher charged with killing a homesteader who refused to sell his land. The presiding judge is Thomas Hartley, one of the most respected territorial judges in Wyoming, known for being fair, honest, incorruptible. 15 years on the bench, impeccable reputation. But Grace knows something nobody else in that courtroom knows. Judge Thomas Hartley is her father. And 15 years ago, when she was 10 years old, he walked out on her family and never came back. Abandoned her, her mother, and her two younger brothers. Left them with nothing. Moved to Wyoming, started over, built a new life. Became successful and respected while his first family struggled in poverty back in Missouri. Grace's mother died 3 years ago, never having seen him again. And now Grace is about to walk into his courtroom as a witness in a trial where she knows, she has proof, that Judge Hartley is protecting the rancher who committed murder. He's going to have to choose between his career and his conscience, and his daughter is going to make sure the whole town watches him do it. Grace Morrison stepped off the afternoon stage in Silver Creek on a Monday in late September. She wore a simple but well-made traveling dress, dark blue, modest, respectable. The kind of dress a school teacher or clerk's wife might wear, nothing that would draw attention. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, no jewelry except a simple gold wedding band. She carried one small traveling case and a leather document folder that never left her hands. The stage driver helped her down. "First time in Silver Creek, ma'am?" "Yes, I'm here for the trial." "The Mercer trial?" He looked surprised. "You a witness?" "Yes." "Well, it's the biggest thing to happen in this town in years. Whole territory's watching. Judge Hartley's presiding. He's the best we got. Fair man, honest. If anyone can get to the bottom and to the truth, it's him." Grace smiled slightly. "I'm sure he is." She hired a boy to carry her case to the Silver Creek Hotel, the only hotel in town. Checked in under the name Mrs. Grace Morrison. The clerk asked if she was here for the trial. She said yes. He asked which side. She said prosecution witness. The clerk nodded knowingly. Clayton Mercer's got half the town convinced he's innocent. Says that homesteader pulled a gun first. Self-defense. And what does the other half of town think? That Clayton Mercer wanted that land and killed James Peterson to get it. Same way as men have run off a dozen other homesteaders over the past few years. The clerk lowered his voice. But Mercer's got money, influence, friends in high places. Some folks think he'll walk no matter what the evidence says. "We'll see," said Grace, quietly. She went to her room, set her case on the bed, sat in the chair by the window overlooking Main Street. From here, she could see the courthouse, a 2-story brick building at the far end of the street, territorial flag flying above it. People coming and going. The trial was set to begin tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Grace opened her document folder. Inside were 3 sets of papers. First, her witness statement. A detailed account of what she'd seen the night James Peterson was killed. She'd been traveling through the area, had stopped to water her horse at a creek near Peterson's homestead, had heard shouting, had watched from a distance as Clayton Mercer and 2 of his ranch hands confronted Peterson, had watched Mercer shoot Peterson in cold blood when Peterson refused to sell. Second, letters, 7 of them, written from Clayton Mercer to Judge Thomas Hartley over the past 2 years, discussing business arrangements, mentioning payments, promising considerations in exchange for favorable outcomes in land disputes, proof of corruption, proof that Judge Hartley had been taking bribes from Mercer for years. Third, a photograph, 15 years old, faded, but still clear enough to see the family in it. A man, a woman, 3 children. The man was younger, without the gray hair and lines around his eyes, but unmistakably Thomas Hartley. The woman was Grace's mother, Margaret, dead 3 years now. The children were Grace at age 10 and her 2 younger brothers. A family photograph from before everything fell apart. Grace looked at it for a long moment, then carefully placed it back in the folder. Tomorrow morning, she would walk into that courtroom. Tomorrow morning, she would sit in the witness stand. And tomorrow, Judge Thomas Hartley would have to look his daughter in the eyes, whether he recognized her or not. The courtroom was packed by 8:30 the next morning, every seat filled, people standing along the back wall, reporters from newspapers in Cheyenne and Denver taking notes. Clayton Mercer sat at the defense table looking calm and confident. Expensive suit, clean-shaven, every inch the respectable rancher. His lawyer, a man brought in from Denver at considerable expense, sat beside him reviewing papers. The prosecution table held the territorial prosecutor, a younger man named William Ross, and his assistant. They looked nervous, outmatched. Grace sat in the witness waiting area, a small room off to the side of the courtroom. She could see into the main room through a partially open door, could see the crowd, the defendant, the lawyers. And at 9 o'clock, she saw Judge Thomas Hartley enter through the door behind the bench. He wore the traditional black robes, carried himself with dignity and authority. His hair was gray now. It had been dark brown in the photograph. His face was lined, but it was unmistakably him. 15 years older, 15 years of living a completely different life while his first family struggled and suffered without him. Grace's hands clenched in her lap. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. The bailiff called the court to order. All rise. The Territory Court of Wyoming is now in session. The Honorable Thomas Hartley presiding. Everyone stood. Judge Hartley took his seat at the bench. His voice carried clearly through the courtroom, deep, authoritative, measured. Please be seated. We are here in the matter of Territory of Wyoming versus Clayton Mercer. Mr. Mercer is charged with murder in the death of James Peterson on the night of August 15th, 1885. Mr. Ross, is the prosecution ready to proceed? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Blackwell, is the defense ready? We are, Your Honor. Then let's begin. Mr. Ross, your opening statement. The prosecutor stood, walked to face the jury, 12 men, ranchers, merchants, working men, the kind of men who might sympathize with the wealthy cattle baron or might resent him for his power. Ross's opening was competent but not inspiring. He laid out the facts. James Peterson had been a homesteader with legal claim to 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Clayton Mercer had wanted that land. It bordered his ranch and had water access. Peterson had refused multiple offers to sell. On August 15th, Mercer and 2 of his men had ridden to Peterson's property. There had been an argument. Peterson had been shot and killed. Mercer claimed self-defense. The prosecution would prove it was murder. The defense opening was much smoother. Blackwell was an experienced trial lawyer. He painted Mercer as a pillar of the community, a job creator, a family man. Yes, there had been a tragic incident, but James Peterson had been unstable, aggressive, had pulled the gun first. Mercer had only defended himself. No witnesses, no evidence of premeditation, reasonable doubt. When the openings were done, Judge Hartley looked at the prosecution. "Mr. Ross, call your first witness." "The territory calls Dr. Marcus Webb." The doctor who'd examined Peterson's body testified. Gunshot wound to the chest, fired from close range, likely killed instantly. Medical facts, nothing that proves murder versus self-defense. The defense cross-examined, got the doctor to admit the wound was consistent with the confrontation where both men had guns drawn. Second witness was the sheriff who'd investigated. He testified about finding Peterson's body, about arresting Mercer, but admitted there was no physical evidence beyond the body and the scene. No other witnesses have come forward. The defense hammered him on cross-examination. "So you have no proof that Mr. Mercer initiated the confrontation? No proof Peterson didn't draw first?" "No, sir, but just answer the question, Sheriff." Grace watched Judge Hartley throughout. He was attentive, professional, ruling on objections fairly. To anyone watching, he seemed like exactly what people said, an honest judge doing his job. But Grace knew better. She'd read those letters. She knew Mercer had been paying him for years. Knew this whole trial was a performance designed to end in acquittal. After the sheriff, the prosecution called 2 of Mercer's ranch hands, the men who'd been present that night. Both testified they'd accompanied Mercer to ask Peterson to reconsider selling. Both claimed Peterson had been drunk, aggressive, had pulled his gun first. Both swore Mercer had only defended himself. On cross-examination, neither one wavered. Well rehearsed, probably paid well to stick to the story. By noon, the prosecution rested. They had nothing, no evidence, no witnesses, just suspicions and a dead homesteader. Judge Hartley called a recess for lunch. "We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock for the defense case." The courtroom emptied. People filed out, discussing what they'd heard. Grace heard the conversations. Most thought Mercer would be acquitted. Reasonable doubt, no proof. But Grace stayed in the witness room because she knew what was coming at 1 o'clock. The prosecution had one more witness, a surprise witness, someone who'd come forward just 3 days ago, claiming to have seen what happened that night. The bailiff had her name on the witness list, Mrs. Grace Morrison. And at 1 o'clock, when court reconvened, the prosecutor would call her to the stand. And Judge Thomas Hartley would see his daughter for the first time in 15 years. Court reconvened at 1 o'clock. The defense attorney stood. Your Honor, the defense rests. We believe the prosecution has failed to meet its burden of proof. Mr. Mercer acted in self-defense. We move for a directed verdict of not guilty. Judge Hartley looked at the prosecutor. Mr. Ross, any rebuttable witnesses? Ross stood. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Mrs. Grace Morrison. A murmur went through the courtroom. This wasn't on the original witness list, a surprise witness. The bailiff opened the door to the witness room. Mrs. Grace Morrison. Grace stood, smoothed her dress, picked up her document folder, walked into the courtroom. Every eye turned to watch her. A woman in her mid-20s, respectable appearance, calm demeanor. She walked to the witness stand with steady steps. The bailiff held out a Bible. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Please state your name for the record. Grace Morrison. She sat in the witness chair, placed her document folder on the rail in front of her, looked out at the courtroom, and for the first time made direct eye contact with Judge Thomas Hartley. He was looking at her with professional attention, a witness he'd never seen before. His expression was neutral, focused. No recognition, none at all. Grace felt something twist in her chest. 15 years. She'd been 10 years old. Now she was 25. A grown woman. Different. But still, he was looking right at her and didn't know her. The prosecutor approached. Mrs. Morrison, where were you on the evening of August 15th of this year? I was traveling through this area on my way to Cheyenne. I stopped to water my horse at Wilson Creek, about half a mile from the Peterson homestead. What time was this? Around 7 o'clock in the evening, just before sunset. Did you see or hear anything unusual? Yes, I heard shouting, men's voices raised in argument. What did you do? I left my horse and walked toward the sound. There was a small rise between the creek and the homestead. I stayed low, behind some brush, and looked down at the Peterson property. What did you see? I saw 3 men on horseback confronting a man on foot. The man on foot was standing in front of a small cabin. Did you recognize any of the men? Not at the time, but I can identify one of them now. She pointed at Clayton Mercer. That man. He was one of the riders. Mercer leaned over to whisper to his lawyer. The lawyer stood. Objection, Your Honor. This witness was not disclosed during discovery. The defense has had no opportunity to investigate her claims. Judge Hartley looked at Ross. Mr. Ross, why wasn't this witness disclosed? She only came forward 3 days ago, Your Honor. As soon as we learned of her, we notified the defense. That's insufficient, Your Honor, the defense argued again. We need time to investigate. Your objection is noted but overruled, Judge Hartley said. This is a murder trial. If the prosecution has a witness with relevant testimony, I'm going to hear it. You'll have your opportunity to cross-examine. Continue, Mr. Ross. Grace watched the judge as he ruled. Still nothing, just the judge doing his job. Ross turned back to her. Mrs. Morrison, please continue. What happened next? The man on horseback, Mr. Mercer, was telling the man on foot that he needed to leave, that the land wasn't his. The man on foot, I later learned his name was James Peterson, said he had legal claim under the Homestead Act, that he wasn't going anywhere. How long did this argument continue? Several minutes. Mr. Mercer kept insisting Mr. Peterson had to leave. Mr. Peterson kept refusing. Then Mr. Mercer said something like, "You're making a big mistake. This is your last chance." What happened then? Grace took a breath. Mr. Peterson turned to walk back toward his cabin. Mr. Mercer drew his revolver and shot him in the back. The court erupted, people gasping, talking. The judge's gavel came down hard. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." The defense attorney was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is completely contrary to the testimony of multiple witnesses who were actually present." "The objection is overruled. Sit down, Mr. Blackwell." Judge Hartley's voice was sharp. "The witness is testifying to what she claims she saw. You'll have your turn to cross-examine." Grace continued. After Mr. Mercer shot Mr. Peterson, the two other riders dismounted. They moved the body. One of them fired another shot into the ground near where Mr. Peterson had been standing. Then they put a revolver in Mr. Peterson's hand. "Staging the scene to look like self-defense," Ross said. "Objection. Calls for speculation." "Sustained. Stick to what the witness saw, Mr. Ross." "Mrs. Morrison, did Mr. Peterson have a weapon in his hand before he was shot?" "No, his hands were empty." "Did he make any threatening moves toward Mr. Mercer?" "No, he turned his back and walked away. That's when Mr. Mercer shot him." "Ross, let that hang in the air. Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "I was frightened. I saw 3 armed men kill someone in cold blood and stage the scene. I didn't know who they were or how much power they had. I left the area immediately and continued to Cheyenne. But when I heard about the trial, heard Mr. Mercer was claiming self-defense, I knew I had to testify." "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. No further questions." The defense attorney approached for cross-examination. "Mrs. Morrison, how far away were you from this alleged incident?" "About 100 yards. 100 yards in fading light, and you expect this jury to believe you could see clearly enough to know who drew first, whether Mr. Peterson had a weapon?" "It was clear enough. I saw what happened." "You claim Mr. Peterson had no weapon, but the sheriff testified a revolver was found in his hand." "Because they put it there after they killed him." The attorney smiled slightly. "Convenient. Tell me, Mrs. Morrison, do you have any connection to James Peterson? Any reason to want to see his killer punished?" "Only that I witnessed a murder." "Do you have any connection to this territory at all? Any family here? Any property? Any reason you would even be traveling through this particular area?" Grace's hands tightened on her document folder. "I have connections, family connections to Wyoming territory, yes." Judge Hartley was watching her carefully now. Something in his expression had shifted, like he was seeing something familiar but couldn't place it. The defense attorney pressed, "What connections?" Grace looked directly at the judge. "My father lives in Wyoming." This is the moment where everything starts to shift. For 15 years, Judge Hartley has lived a completely separate life from the family he abandoned. He's successful, respected, powerful, and now his daughter, who he doesn't even recognize, is sitting in his courtroom, about to expose not just a murder, but his own corruption. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it walks right through the door and demands to be seen. The defense attorney continued. Your father lives in Wyoming. Where? Right here in Silver Creek. A murmur went through the courtroom, people looking around, trying to figure out who her father might be. And what's your father's name? Grace opened her document folder. Before I answer that, I'd like to present additional evidence to the court. The defense attorney looked annoyed. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The witness is being cross-examined. Your Honor, Grace said, speaking directly to Judge Hartley, the evidence I have relates directly to this case. It proves that Clayton Mercer committed murder, and it proves that this trial has been corrupted from the beginning. The courtroom went silent. Judge Hartley leaned forward. That's a very serious accusation, Mrs. Morrison. I know, Your Honor, but the evidence supports it. Judge Hartley studied her face. His expression was troubled now, searching. Approach the bench, both attorneys with you. Grace stepped down from the witness stand. The prosecutor and defense attorney joined her at the judge's bench. Judge Hartley looked at the document folder in her hands. What evidence are you referring to? Grace pulled out the first set of papers. These are letters from Clayton Mercer to you, Your Honor, written over the past 2 years, discussing payments in exchange for favorable rulings in land disputes, in exchange for protection. Judge Hartley's face went white. The defense attorney grabbed for the letters. Let me see those. Grace held them out of reach. They're addressed to Judge Hartley at his private residence. They discuss specific amounts of money, specific cases, specific rulings that you made that benefited Mercer's land claims. The prosecutor was staring at the judge. Your Honor, if this is true. How did you obtain those letters? Judge Hartley's voice was strained. I stole them from Mr. Mercer's ranch office 3 weeks ago, along with copies of the bank records showing the payments. The defense attorney was sputtering. This is illegal. Evidence obtained by theft is inadmissible. Actually, the prosecutor said quietly, if the evidence proves corruption of a sitting judge, it's admissible under territorial law. We have an exception for cases involving judicial misconduct. Judge Hartley stood. I'm calling a recess. My chambers now. Just the witness and both attorneys. He stepped down from the bench. The bailiff looked confused. Your Honor? 15-minute recess. Clear the courtroom. People protested, but the bailiff and deputies started ushering them out. Within minutes, the courtroom was empty except for Judge Hartley, Grace, and the 2 attorneys. Hartley led them to his chambers, a small office behind the courtroom, closed the door. Then he turned to Grace, really looked at her for the first time. Who are you? Grace met his eyes. You really don't recognize me? Should I? She pulled out the photograph, the 15-year-old family photo, set it on his desk. Judge Hartley looked down at it. His hand reached out, trembling slightly to pick it up. His face changed, color draining, eyes widening. He looked from the photograph to Grace and back again. Margaret? He whispered, looking at the woman in the picture. My mother. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. She never saw you again after you left. His eyes moved to the little girl in the photograph, 10 years old, dark hair, serious expression. Then up to Grace's face. Grace? Hello, Father. The defense attorney looked between them. You're Judge Hartley's daughter? Yes, he left us 15 years ago. My mother, my brothers, and me. He walked out and started a new life here. Left us with nothing. Judge Hartley sank into his chair behind the desk, still holding the photograph. You were 10 years old. Yes. I didn't know you. You look so different. 15 years will do that. The prosecutor was reading the letters. His face was grim. Your Honor, this is evidence of corruption, bribery. If this gets out. It's going to get out, Grace said, because I'm not the only one who has copies. I sent another set to the Territorial Attorney General in Cheyenne. They should receive them tomorrow. Judge Hartley looked up at her. Why? Why would you do this? Because you're protecting a murderer. Because Clayton Mercer killed James Peterson in cold blood, and you were going to let him walk free because he pays you. Because this has to stop. I never. He stopped, took a breath. I never took money to let a murderer go free. The other cases were land disputes, civil matters. I thought. You thought it didn't matter? That you could stay bought just for the small things? Grace, I don't. Her voice was hard. You don't get to call me that. You lost that right 15 years ago when you abandoned your family. She turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Ross, I'm placing these letters and bank records into evidence. They prove Judge Hartley has been taking bribes from Clayton Mercer for 2 years. They prove this trial is corrupted. The prosecutor nodded. This requires me to report it immediately to the Attorney General. And it means Judge Hartley needs to recuse himself from this case. No, Grace said. Everyone looked at her. I want him to finish this trial. I want him to make a choice. Judge Hartley stared at her. What choice? You can dismiss this case right now. Claim judicial misconduct invalidates the proceedings. Let Mercer walk. But then I go public with everything. The letters, the bribes, your corruption, your family you abandoned. All of it. And you lose everything. Your career, your reputation, your freedom. She stepped closer to this desk. Or you can finish this trial, hear all the evidence, instruct the jury honestly, and let them convict Clayton Mercer of murder. But that means you'll still lose everything, because I'm still giving this evidence to the Attorney General. You'll still be arrested. You'll still face trial. But at least one thing you did as a judge will be right. If you're still with me, you know this is about more than one murder trial. It's about a daughter forcing her father to face what he's become. Corrupt, bought, protecting killers. It's about him having to choose between losing everything quietly or doing one right thing before it all comes down. If you want to see how this ends, with the verdict, with the arrest, with justice, hit that subscribe button now. The silence in the judge's chambers was absolute. Judge Hartley sat behind his desk, still holding the photograph of his family, the family he'd abandoned. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Morrison, I understand your anger, but... It's not anger, Grace said quietly. It's justice. He gets to choose who he wants to be in this moment. The corrupt judge who lets a murderer walk to save himself, or the judge who does the right thing even though it costs him everything. The defense attorney found his voice. Your Honor, this woman has admitted to stealing private documents. She's attempting to blackmail you. You cannot allow. Be quiet, Judge Hartley said. His voice was hollow. He looked up at Grace. If I convict Mercer, you'll still turn over this evidence? I'll still be arrested? Yes. So either way, I lose everything? Yes. The only thing you get to choose is whether you lose it doing the right thing or the wrong thing. That's not much of a choice. It's more than my mother got. It's more than James Peterson got. It's more than any of people Mercer's hurt over the years got. Judge Hartley set the photograph down carefully. How was your mother? I told you, she died 3 years ago. And your brothers? Samuel works on the railroad, 17 years old. Joseph is in school in St. Louis, 15. I paid for it with money I saved working as a seamstress for 8 years. Something in his face crumpled. Grace, I didn't know how hard things would be when I left. I thought... You thought what? That we'd be fine? That a woman with 3 children and no money would just figure it out? I was drowning. The debts, the pressure, everything collapsing around me. I thought if I started over somewhere new, you could pretend the first family didn't exist? Yes, you made that very clear. I sent money. The first few years, I sent money when I could. $50 total over 3 years. That's what you sent. We were evicted twice. Mama worked herself sick taking in laundry, sewing, cleaning houses. We ate 1 meal a day for 2 years, and you sent $50. Judge Hartley's hands were shaking. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't... I know it's not enough, but I am sorry. I don't want your apology. I want you to do the right thing. Once. Just once in the last 15 years. She turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Ross, can this trial continue with Judge Hartley presiding? Or does the corruption invalidate it? Ross looked uncomfortable. Technically, if the judge recuses himself, we need a new trial with a new judge. But if he doesn't recuse himself and the defendant is convicted, the conviction could be appealed based on judicial misconduct. So Clayton Mercer might go free anyway. It's possible. The territorial Supreme Court would have to decide if the conviction stands. Grace looked at her father. Then you'd better make sure your rulings are absolutely by the book, no appearance of bias, no questionable decisions. You make this the fairest trial anyone has ever seen, because if Mercer walks on appeal because of your corruption, that's on you too. Judge Hartley stood slowly. I'll finish the trial. I'll do it right. Good. But Grace, can we talk? After this is over, can we? No. We don't have anything to talk about. You made your choices 15 years ago. I'm making mine now. This is justice, not reconciliation. She picked up her documents, started toward the door. Grace! His voice cracked. I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know you'd grown into this. Something so strong. Someone who would do this. She stopped at the door, looked back at him. I grew up without a father. I learned to be strong because I had to be. You don't get credit for that. She walked out. The prosecutor followed her. Mrs. Morrison, you understand that you'll need to testify about the evidence you have about the theft. You could face charges. I know. I'm prepared for that. And you're sure about this? Forcing him to finish the trial? You could just let me report this to the Attorney General and... I'm sure. He needs to make his choice. He needs to know what it costs. She walked back into the courtroom. The crowd was filling back in, taking their seats, all of them wondering what had happened in chambers. Judge Hartley emerged a moment later, took his seat at the bench. His face was composed but pale. This court will resume. Mrs. Morrison, please retake the witness stand. Mr. Blackwell, you may continue your cross-examination. Grace isn't giving her father an easy way out. She's not offering forgiveness or reconciliation. She's offering him one chance to do something right before everything he's built collapses. That's harder than just exposing him, because now he has to live with knowing that his own daughter gave him the opportunity to choose justice. And his choice, whatever it is, will define who he really is. The trial resumed. The defense attorney's cross-examination of Grace was brutal, but she held firm. Yes, she'd stolen the documents. Yes, she'd waited to come forward. No, she had no other motive than seeing justice done. The letters and bank records were entered into evidence. The defense objected strenuously. Judge Hartley overruled every objection, citing territorial law and corruption evidence. When the defense attorney tried to argue that the documents were fabricated, Ross called a handwriting expert who confirmed the letters were in Clayton Mercer's hand. The trial continued for 2 more days. The defense put on witnesses claiming Mercer was a good man, a pillar of the community. Ross tore them apart on cross-examination, using the evidence from the letters, showing Mercer had threatened homesteaders, used intimidation, bought off officials. Judge Hartley presided with scrupulous fairness. Every ruling was by the book, every objection carefully considered. If anything, he bent over backward to give the defense every benefit. On the 3rd day, both sides rested. Judge Hartley instructed the jury. His instructions were clear, precise, legally correct. He explained reasonable doubt, explained the burden of proof, explained that they must consider all the evidence and decide based on the facts. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. They came back just before 6 o'clock in the evening. The foreman stood. We find the defendant, Clayton Mercer, guilty of murder in the 1st degree. The courtroom erupted. Mercer's face went white. His lawyer immediately stood to demand a new trial, claimed judicial misconduct. Judge Hartley's gavel came down. Motion for new trial is denied. Sentencing will be held tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Mr. Mercer, you will be held in custody pending sentencing. This court is adjourned. As the deputies led Mercer away in chains, Judge Hartley looked across the courtroom at Grace. She met his eyes, nodded once. He'd made his choice. The next morning, as promised, Grace turned over all her evidence to the Territorial Attorney General, who'd arrived from Cheyenne overnight. Federal marshals arrested Judge Thomas Hartley in his chambers at 8 o'clock, 1 hour before the sentencing hearing. The charges: corruption, bribery, obstruction of justice. A visiting judge from Laramie came to handle the sentencing. Clayton Mercer was sentenced to hang. Execution set for 6 weeks later. Judge Hartley's trial was scheduled for 3 months out. Grace attended every day. She testified about the letters, about the theft, about everything. She answered every question honestly. Yes, she'd known what she was doing was illegal. Yes, she'd done it anyway. The prosecutor tried to argue she should be granted immunity for exposing corruption. The judge denied it. Grace was convicted of theft and sentenced to 6 months in the territorial prison. Suspended pending good behavior. Judge Hartley was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, his law license revoked, his career destroyed. During his trial, he never looked at Grace. During her testimony at his trial, she never looked away. Grace got what she came for. Mercer convicted, her father exposed and punished, justice served, but it cost her too. A criminal record, 6 months suspended sentence. The knowledge that she destroyed her own father even though he deserved it. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good. Sometimes it just feels necessary. And you live with the weight of it anyway. Six months later, Grace stood on the platform at the Silver Creek train station with her traveling case and her document folder. She testified at Clayton Mercer's hanging, watched him drop, watched justice served for James Peterson. She'd visited her father once in federal prison. He'd asked to see her. She'd gone, though she didn't know why. He'd looked smaller in prison clothes, older, broken. "I'm sorry," he'd said, "for everything, for leaving, for the choices I made, for becoming someone who would take bribes and protect killers." "I know," Grace had said. "Can you ever forgive me?" "I don't know. Maybe someday, but not today." "That's fair." "I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because it was right, because someone had to." "I know, and you were right about all of it." She'd left after 15 minutes, didn't know if she'd visit again. Now she was leaving Silver Creek, going back to Missouri to see her brothers. Samuel had written. He'd been promoted to supervisor on the railroad. Joseph was doing well in school, talking about becoming a lawyer. Ironic that. A lawyer. The train whistle blew. Grace picked up her case. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house had come to see her off. "You did a brave thing, dear. People in this town won't forget it." "I just did what needed doing." "Still brave. Where will you go after Missouri?" "I don't know. Maybe Denver, maybe California. Somewhere new." "You could stay here. People respect you. You could build a life." "No. This town will always be the place where I exposed my father. I don't want to live in that shadow." The train pulled in. Grace boarded. Found a seat. Looked out the window at Silver Creek one last time. A nice town. Good people, mostly. But not her town. The train started moving. Grace opened her document folder. Empty now. All the evidence submitted. All the trials concluded. She'd kept one thing, though. The photograph. Her family, 15 years ago. She looked at it for a long moment. At her mother, who struggled and died without ever seeing justice for being abandoned, at her younger self, who'd had to grow up too fast, at her father, who'd looked so respectable in that picture, but had been on the edge of running even then. Grace slipped the photograph into her pocket. Then she closed the folder and looked out at the Wyoming landscape rolling past the train window. Somewhere ahead was a new life, a new start, and she'd earned it.